Well, it is an absolute pleasure to be here with you tonight, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Llewellyn Sánchez-Werner, and I'm thrilled to be joined by a terrific pianist who I'm lucky to call my dear friend, Derek Wang. Now, you just heard Bach on both of these historical instruments, the Bechstein and the Érard. We now want to show you each of the pianos individually before going back to enjoying their full sonorous splendor as a team. So we'll play a French piece on the French piano, and then a German piece on the German piano. Makes sense. So the French piece that we'll play is Debussy's En bateau from his Petite suite, which means on a boat or sailing on a boat. And in it, I think we'll be able to explore the impressionistic colors that he was so known for. This, of course, was a piano that was the standard piano at the Paris Conservatory for almost a century, and would have been the piano that Chopin would have written many of his great works on and would have performed on regularly. So we're excited to explore the colors on that piano of the French.
So on this evening where we're exploring the possibilities of pianistic color, of pianistic construction, and of the great history and tradition of that, I think we're very aware that by beginning our concert with Bach, we've chosen the composer whose music always provokes the question of what are the right instruments for it. And it's a question which, in a way, we're going to turn on its head, because we have so enjoyed exploring the new possibilities that these instruments, which for the record Bach would not have known, brought to that organ sonata, specifically in the delineation of the different registers, that is, the different voices in the music, which our two pianistic colors have highlighted. Now, of course, these are the instruments that a composer like Brahms would have gotten to know his Bach on, and so there is, as always, an authenticity in thinking in terms of those traditions. And I'll just leave it and say that when we play the Debussy on the Érard, as we're about to do, it does still feel like it's the right instrument for that music. And from one watery piece to another, next on the Bechstein, Robert Schumann's Am Springbrunnen, by the fountain. Now this comes from a collection of pieces that Schumann titled Piano Pieces für kleine und große Kinder, which is for small and for large or grown-up children. I think we belong to the latter category by this point, but we're still playing this lovely music.
Absolutely, and I think the one word that maybe comes to mind for me in this piece is fantastical, which is something that we see a lot in all of the great German aphorisms and poems. I think that here we see a certain delicacy, a crystalline delicacy of the piano that is explored, a sense of wonder, and I think Schumann as a composer did that so well. So here now, Springbrunnen. The next piece by Cécile Chaminade Pas de cymbales was actually orchestrated for a ballet score. So I think we can sense the airiness and the buoyancy of dance within all of its clangorous humor and fun dissonance. I think that as we expand back to two pianos, just something that I'll note is that, of course, one of the challenges of playing four hands on one piano is how does one person's pedaling affect the other person's shaping and breathing and phrasing? I think when we have the two instruments, especially as instruments as different as these, it's about finding the unique palettes of each and allowing them to blend in a way that really makes sense for all those listening. And so I think this is a piece that allows us to get into the weeds in a fun way about just that topic.
Exactly. And Llewellyn, you mentioned the Érard being the piano of the Paris Conservatoire for really a whole lineage of French composers. Chaminade belongs to that lineage in part, although actually her father forbade her from enrolling in the Conservatoire formally, thinking it improper for a woman of her social class. However, she did study privately.
And right before International Women's Day, we say this, no less. Oh my goodness.
And so tonight we consider how the piano as a creative tool opens up the possibilities for any artist who plays it, not only in terms of piano playing, but in terms of the colors they hear. And these two instruments unlocked that world of color that blossomed in the tradition of orchestral music at this turn of the century. And that's what we're going to bring to this little sorbet musically. So in this little tasting menu of musical colors, there's also an idea of musical space. You see, Ravel wrote two pieces for two pianos that he entitled Sites auriculaires, places in sound. And we've used these two pieces as points of reference to expand to other musical places that are slightly distant from the lands in which the Bechstein and the Érard were made. What I mean is that we'll begin by pairing the Habanera, the first movement of the Sites auriculaires of Ravel, with the Idilio mexicano of Manuel Ponce. And following that pairing, we'll proceed to the second movement of the Ravel, Entre, paired with transcriptions of Balinese ceremonial music by Colin McPhee. But to start with the Ravel Habanera and Manuel Ponce's Idilio Mexicano. Now, all of the French composers loved to evoke Spain in their music, but for Ravel, this sense of a distant place was overlaid with the sense of a familiar one, because Ravel was born very close to the Spanish border, and his mother was Basque and Spanish as well. So many of his friends noted that Ravel had an idealized image of this ancestral homeland for him through his mother. That comes through in this Habanera, which includes a little poetic citation from a poem of Baudelaire, which evokes a land that has been caressed by the sun, que le soleil caresse.
Absolutely, and such sonorous caressing also is helped by almost strum-like arpeggiated figures and by a tonal palette that also uses modes, like the Phrygian mode, very often associated with the complexity of Spanish sound. And I think that, you know, that element of Ravel's mother being Basque is also combined with the clinicism of his father being Swiss. But let's focus first on his mother. I think that the Habanera is a dance form that comes from Cuba. It's of Cuban origin, and we know it, of course, from the very famous version in Carmen that goes like this. So you'll hear Derek, and then passing it back to me, playing this rhythm through. There's a through line here between that dance sensibility and then what we hear next in Ponce's Idilio Mexicano, where there also is a kind of almost zapateado-inspired dance rhythm. And I think that it's fascinating to explore dance in completely different parts of the world. So Manuel Ponce, of course, a Mexican composer, a grand student of Franz Liszt. Liszt taught Martin Krauss, who then taught Ponce. So there's a fascinating pedagogical lineage there. But Ponce wove the Mexican folk tradition with the classical tradition and was a supreme melodist. And so the last thing I'll say is in the second piece, and we're playing the two back to back, as you noted, so without talking in between, in the second piece, it's Mexican Idol. So what scene can we imagine? Is it a scene from an Octavio Paz poem? Is it a scene from the beautiful nature of Tulum? Whatever scenes you may have in mind, imagine what a Mexican scene may mean to you, and then go there as soon as you can and find even more scenes. But here now, the Ravel going into the Ponce for that pair.
And with that closing bell in the Ponce, we're taken now back to Ravel, to Entre, between bells, the second movement of Suite Auriculaire, which we are pairing with these three pieces that Colin McPhee transcribed in Bali from the music played on the Balinese gamelan. Now, there emerges at this turn of the century a new way of thinking about piano sound. Up until then, you see, the piano had been a kind of chameleon. The ideal was always to imitate the sounds of other instruments, above all, the singing voice. And every pianist to this day craves that praise. Oh, your singing tone, right? But around this time, the piano's sounds, taken on its own terms, become a new source of fascination. The bell-like resonance of the piano as itself a source for compositional exploration. The idea of the piano's hammers striking the strings and producing this resonance, which, almost like a gong, actually can seem to grow sometimes before it decays. And this is an approach which we have both in Ravel's Entre and in these transcriptions of gamelan music for the piano.
Absolutely, and I think that in the Balinese ceremonial music by Colin McPhee, we have a composer who, despite being Canadian in origin, sought to evoke these Balinese sounds from Indonesia, but also Hindu sounds from Indonesia, which is very interesting. And I think that whereas perhaps other pieces on the program, like the Wagner we're going to hear later, will have leitmotifs where a specific theme is connected to a figure, a protagonist, in this piece, the music sets the stage. It sets the stage for rituals of deities, for battle scenes, for the entrance of a protagonist. But it's meant for us to reflect and meditate on what is happening more than to focus on the very specific actions of one figure. And so I think in it, we can allow our minds to wander, to meditate and to breathe as we hear these evocations of gongs, of gamelan, as you said, played on these pianos from 1893 and 1903. So that's been a fabulous experiment to explore with you. But first, we'll have the Ravel and the bells, almost like a clock tower bell, evoked.
The first of those transcriptions by Colin McPhee is an overture to a religious play performed in Bali, as you mentioned, Llewellyn. And we're now about to perform the overture to another kind of religious-inflected drama, which is Wagner's Tannhäuser.
Only in New York you have the Mahabharata going to Tannhäuser. That's all I can say.
Yeah, but here we are, Tannhäuser, in the transcription by Max Reger for 2 pianos. And this is music that begins with the famous Pilgrim's Chorus. And it's also music that set off many pilgrimages just to go hear it. One of those pilgrims, who wasn't entirely a fan of the idea at first, was Mark Twain, who wrote in his account of visiting the Wagner Festival at Bayreuth that Tannhäuser was the one work which seemed to melt his cynical exterior. He wrote, "Here was music to make one drunk with pleasure, music to make one take scrip and staff and beg his way round the world to hear it."
I think that while we have been depicting all kinds of instruments from around the world, and we just came from the gongs, the gamelan, and the bells, I think now we have an opportunity to depict on the piano Western orchestral instruments, the strings, the brass, the winds, and that always provides a challenge for pianists. As you noted, Derek, earlier, we're always trying to bring out the singing tone, but also the singing tone of all of these other wonderful instruments with their bows, with their embouchure. And so I think that trying to blend all of those families of instruments together, we are really enjoying doing so on these 2 instruments, which already give us so many different sonorous possibilities than the Steinways and Busendorfers that we're used to playing on. So I think that there's an opportunity here to explore the richness and the depth and the counterpoint, and as you mentioned also, the narrative exploits of this overture to Tannhäuser in the arrangement by Max Reger. I will break the rules, and just because I just got married a couple of months ago and it's her birthday tomorrow, I just wanted to, and this is overly sentimental, I wanted to dedicate this to my wife, Tanya, who is in the audience with us today. And there are all of these motives of love and passion surrounding Wagner, but right now, we will hear the Tannhäuser Overture. Thank you so much. And from Wagner, we'll go to the world of Louis Moreau Gottschalk, an American composer and our way of acknowledging the 250th anniversary of the United States. Now, Gottschalk was born in New Orleans. He had a Creole mother, a Jewish father. He spent a little bit of time in Paris. He played for Chopin, who upon hearing him, proclaimed him the future king of pianists. And this piece, Union, was performed by Gottschalk himself for Abraham Lincoln. Perhaps the only time in this country that we have been more divided than we are right now. But Gottschalk, of course, was an extreme talent, came from an immigrant family. Immigrants, of course, make this country what it is. And I think that, yes. And I'll say that riddled throughout the piece are lots of little themes. I almost wonder, should we spoil them or should we let them, should we say what they are?
Well, the title of the piece, we'll put it this way, Concert Paraphrase on National Airs. Sure. The first of these national airs has a surprising marking in the score. It's malinconia, melancholy. And I think the circumstances of the union that the title of the piece refers to explain that melancholy, explain also the sounds of conflict that we hear evoked by the two pianos in this music. I mean, I think American presidents over the 250 years of this country have had kind of a mixed record when it comes to musical literacy.
Nixon played on the piano a little bit. Look it up. This is real. Go
Nixon
ahead.
did. I think Harry Truman was a pianist also.
Oh, okay.
But on the other hand, Dwight Eisenhower once hosted Leonard Bernstein at the White House. And Bernstein played a Mozart concerto, and then he played a Rhapsody in Blue. And then afterwards, President Eisenhower said, you know, Lenny, I liked that last one you did. It had a theme. I like music that has a theme, not all of them arias and barcarolles. And back to this piece's time, Ulysses S. Grant once claimed, I can only whistle 2 tunes. One of them is Yankee Doodle, and one of them ain't.
I think the best politician pianist might be Pete Buttigieg and the mayor of Boston also, who was playing the Swan recently.
Yes,
That's
yes.
interesting. So,
Yes,
anyway,
Mayor Wu
this is
Boston.
as much of a tangent as it could possibly be. But politicians playing music would be good to be able to promote more dialogue and to use music for its healing properties.
And very finally, just on the subject of the national airs, I'm reminded, I think often, of how Francis Scott Key's words that we often sing end with a question, don't they? Does that Star-Spangled Banner yet wave? It's a question. It's a question which each generation must answer, and it's one that this music poses even as it celebrates.
just one more short, a short and intimate piece by Schumann, Abendlied.